This is a more detailed session looking at how to run Office Connector starter reports and general guidelines for customizing them. In this session, I'm going to provide some additional details about the job list with maps and weather report. I'm also going to go into some guidelines for customizing this report if you wish to do that. I'm going to start by double-clicking on the Office Connector Launchpad icon on the desktop. I'll click on the Starter tab because that's where all of the Office Connector starter reports would be shown. And here I see job list with maps and weather. Now I'm also going to go ahead and point out the fact that on the Reports tab there is a JC job list with maps and weather. This really is the same report except for two things. One is that this report would require a license of Office Connector. And number two, with that license of Office Connector, you would be able to modify the report in terms of modifying the query functionality, such as changing the columns that it returns from the database or querying other data, other tables and other files and whatnot. Customizing the starter version of the report is limited to just what you can do within the features of Excel, but not modifying the query functionality of the report. I'm going to go ahead and create a copy of this report by double-clicking on it, and that creates a workbook from the template. And if this were the first time that you were running an Office Connector starter report on this workstation, then you might see a message like this. And this is indicating that macros are presently disabled. Now, macros are required for Office Connector starter reports to function properly, and hence why we're seeing this message appear. So at this point, I could click on the Yes button to see a help topic online that describes this scenario and then what to do about it. I'm going to go ahead and click on No and just take us through that process. So up at the top I see a security warning, and if I click on Options, then I see this alert about macros indicating that macros have been disabled. And this is actually a good thing normally, because if you were to receive a Excel workbook from someone that contained macros and you didn't know what those macros were intended to do, or you didn't know the person who created them, then that could be an unsafe situation where those macros might be malicious to some degree. And so by having the macros disabled, you're protecting yourself from that. Now, of course, in this case, we do need those macros to run. So we have a couple of options. We can click on Enable this content, and all that does is enable the macros for this particular workbook right now. When I close it and reopen it, then I'm going to get the same prompt again the next time. So that's really just temporary. If I click the third option, I'm saying to trust all documents from this publisher being Event One Software. So that means that any Excel workbooks that contain macros that are digitally signed by Event One Software's digital signature, which only Event One Software can do, those workbooks would be automatically trusted, so then I wouldn't have that security warning. The macros would just automatically work. So that's what I'm going to do in this case, and by doing that, now on this workstation, all of my Office Connector workbooks will automatically work. Now this particular report does not have any parameters that control the output, so I don't have to enter anything in advance in order to run the report. So therefore the report runs automatically, and that's why right now it's prompting me to select a Sage Timberline Office data folder. And I can go ahead and select my data folder, click OK, and at this point, if I had security enabled, it would prompt me to enter my username and password for Timberline. Now the first thing that I see when I run a report is this information worksheet. And this is really pretty important. I really encourage everyone to take the time to read this at least once for any given report, because it tells you what the report is designed to do, kind of what the purpose of the report is, and also gives you other information about the report's characteristics and just important things to know. So as an example, there's this macros section right here, and if macros were still disabled, I would see a big red bold warning message indicating that, and some information telling me that I need to do something about that in order for this report to work. And the help topic would just provide additional information and instructions. Scrolling on down, I see that it identifies the software applications that are required, whether those would be Sage Timberline Office applications or Event One applications. It shows the applications that are required. then the data files that are required. In this case, job cost is a required application, so hence I need the job cost master file to be present. Scrolling on down, I see an enumerated list of steps to run the report. And then our typical disclaimer, and all this is telling you basically is that before you start using this report to make business decisions or incorporating it into your workflow, I encourage you to fully evaluate it first and make sure that it's suitable for the purpose that you're envisioning. Then we have information about the design of the report, kind of telling you how it was built, just some highlights of that, and then the version of the report. And this is provided because sometimes we will release new versions of the software that include some new versions of the same report, where we've made some enhancements or changes to the report, and so you might want to know or be able to identify workbooks that were created from an older version versus the newer version. Okay, so moving on to the job information worksheet. This is really where the report is at. So the report's already been run at this point. If I wanted to run the report again, I can just simply click on the refresh data button, and that brings in any current information, any new jobs that have been added. If jobs have been closed, they're going to drop off the list automatically. Now I'll go ahead and point out here that clicking the refresh data button really is the same thing as going to the Office Connector toolbar and clicking on refresh Timberline data. Now the Office Connector toolbar in this case is under the add-ins tab on the ribbon in Excel 2007 and higher. If I was working with Excel 2003 or 2002, this Office Connector toolbar would just be stacked up with the rest of the Office Connector toolbars at the top. While I'm here, I'm going to just provide a quick overview of the Office Connector toolbar. So the first button on this toolbar is allowing me to select my Sage Timberline Office data folder. So if I click that, I get prompted with a list of data folders. And I can select the data folder that I want, click OK, and the report is automatically rerun with that other data folder and the results are displayed. And I can very quickly and easily switch back if I want to as well. The next button on the toolbar allows me to save a copy of the report as values. This was talked about a little bit in the introduction video for this report. Basically all this is doing is saving it under a different name and stripping out any of the Office Connector functionality and converting those things to values. And that way it becomes an ordinary Excel workbook that's not tied to your Timberline data at all. And that way that can be shared with someone else who has Excel but does not have Office Connector. The next button brings up the Edit Preferences window. I will talk about this in a little bit more detail later, so I'm going to skip that right now. And the next set of buttons have to do with designing reports. Now this would of course require a full license of Office Connector, specifically Office Connector Designer. And so these buttons would allow you to insert your own queries, insert your own worksheet functions that bring in values from the database. Again, these are not available within the Office Connector Starter Edition. These last two buttons have to do with, again, using functionality that's part of a license of Office Connector, specifically Office Connector Write, allowing you to write data from Excel back into Timberline. And again, in this case, this is not part of the Office Connector Starter functionality, but that functionality is available to you if you chose to purchase a license of Office Connector Write. The last button on the toolbar is just going to bring up help about Office Connector and how to use it. So that's kind of the overview of the Office Connector toolbar. Next, we'll take a look at just how to interact with the data on the report. Now, like many of the reports that we've built, we make use of the Excel auto filter feature. And so, for example, in each column heading, you see a drop-down button right there. So, for example, I could click on Project Manager, select a specific project manager or more than one, click OK, and the report data is filtered immediately to show just those results. And I can do that with multiple columns as well. So I could filter on a specific combination of city and state, or state and project manager, or what have you. Some other things to explore with regard to auto filters that I won't really go into in a lot of detail right now is the fact that in addition to selecting just these distinct values off the list, you'll notice at the top here there are some other options like text filters. So we can say look for things that begin with a certain fragment of text, or ends with something, or contains a certain fragment of text. You can also apply a custom filter that allows you to include ands and ors and multiple values. So this is definitely a feature worth exploring to better learn how to navigate your data and find the information that you're after. Now, in addition to filtering, another way you might want to interact with your data is to very quickly be able to resort it. And for that, we can go to the Data tab, select what column we want to sort by, click the Sort button, and it immediately sorts. The nice thing about this is when I refresh the data, the sort order is preserved. So I can sort by address or job description or really whatever value that I want to sort by. If you wanted to sort by multiple things, then you just click on the Sort button and then define each individual sort level to sort on one thing, then the next, and then the next, and whatnot. So next, let's take a look at some guidelines for customizing this report. The first thing we'll take a look at is just the fact that this report really is very simple in that it contains mostly just one query. And by query, what I'm referring to is if I click the name box up here and I select job list, then I see selected on the report this range of cells that represents the query. In this case, it represents the query plus a few additional columns that contain some formulas, which I'll go into in just a moment. So this query is dynamic, meaning that when the query gets refreshed, if there are any new jobs, then rows get automatically inserted, and if jobs drop off the list, then rows get deleted. So this range automatically expands and contracts as your data changes. So that's important to recognize because if you start working with the rows within the query and changing things there, you might find that your changes aren't preserved. So for example, if I decided to delete these two jobs, jobs 4 and 5 off the list, and then maybe go to the end and insert a row, maybe even type in my own caption, when I refresh the data, that entire section of the report gets rebuilt based on the current data. So the jobs that I deleted get re-added, and the custom row that I inserted gets overwritten. And so that's just something to be aware of when we're talking about a query that's dynamically reading from the data, because it's going to rebuild that section of the report whenever you refresh the information. Now columns are a little bit different. If I wanted to insert a column, I can go up here and right click and say Insert Column, type in my column caption, and then let's say we'll use the Excel left function to take the left 2 characters of the job number. We'll double click on the fill handle to copy that down. And this column is going to be preserved whenever I refresh data. So when I click on refresh, that column stays. And when I save the workbook, close it, reopen it later, that column is still going to be there. So I've actually made a change to the design of the report just within this workbook. Now the original template that I started with was back on the Office Connector Launchpad. That template has not changed. Only this copy of the workbook that I'm currently working with is what I'm changing. Now other customizations that you can make involve changing the layout, the format and whatnot. So you can certainly go up and say maybe insert rows to make room for other information that you might have. You could change the color scheme, change the borders, change number formats, and what have you. So all of those changes are definitely legal to make, and they don't invalidate anything. So in this case, I'll change this blue font to maybe a black font. So you can definitely change the format, like I said, the numeric formatting, the layout, the placement of information and whatnot can all be changed. Now I mentioned that we can insert a column like I did here, showing the year column. And what allows that to work is really a couple of rules that are being followed. Number one, that's a formula. So any new columns that you add to the body of the report must be a formula. And the second rule is that that formula must be associated with the query in some way. And what I mean is really that the formula needs to be adjacent to the query. So in this case, the formula column is right in the middle of the query. So if I click up here again to show where that query is located, my year column is right in the middle of the query. So that satisfies that second rule. Column is adjacent to the query. And now I can't insert a column to the left of the first column of the query, but I can always insert the column to the right of that first column. Anywhere that you see to the right of the description, to the right of the project manager, and so forth. In fact, I can go all the way to the right, and for this I'm going to go ahead and just turn off freeze panes for a moment so we can scroll a little bit easier. So I'll scroll on over, and if I was going to add another column out here to the right of the query, again the same rule applies. Number one has to be a formula, and number two, it has to be basically touching the query, or at least touching another formula or set of formulas that are touching the query. And I'll notice that up at the top I have columns J, K, and then it jumps to N. So what I have are some hidden columns, and this is something that's pretty common. We'll oftentimes have hidden columns that carry out certain calculations that are used in other parts of the report, and those columns don't need to be seen. And so in this case, if I was to have added my formula out here in column N, then I would have had a break. I would have had two empty columns that don't contain formulas. They're not part of the query, and those would have been separating column N from the query, and I'll show what that would amount to. So if I had a very simple formula, such as if the zip code is equal to 97006, return yes, otherwise return no. Now what I'd want to have happen is when I refresh the workbook, what I want to have happen is for that formula to copy down to all of the rows in the query. You'll notice that in this case it didn't. Whereas if I had inserted my column here, put in the same formula, and then refresh the query, that formula gets copied down to all of the rows. And likewise, when rows get deleted, those extra formula cells get deleted as well. And that's working simply because that formula is directly to the right of the query, or at least directly to the right of a column that might contain a formula that's touching the query. Okay, so the last type of customization that I'll show really has a lot to do with really how this workbook works, or the purpose that it serves. In that we have this Google Map column and this MSN Weather column. And really the concept here is that we're providing an easy way to link this workbook to other files, other locations, places on the internet, so that we can very quickly get from this place to somewhere else, showing the information related to the particular line that we're looking at. So I can apply this to not just links on the internet, but also to files on your network, other documents, things like that. So I'm going to show a simple example of this. I'll insert a column, call this project folder, and I'll use the Excel hyperlink function. And for the hyperlink function, the first thing it wants is the location of the link. And I'm going to follow just standard link syntax. I'm going to say this is going to be a file. And in my case, my projects are on drive F, so it's F:\projects. And I might have a folder set up for each project where the folder name is just simply the job number. So that formula right there basically puts it all together so that I have a complete path to F project's job number. The second argument of the hyperlink function is just the text to show. So I'm going to say click to open. Okay, so now I have my hyperlink. I can copy that down. Okay. So now when I click this, it will open up Windows Explorer in the particular folder that I've designated for that project. And like I said, that could also have been, instead of a folder, that could have been a Word document, another Excel file, an image, anything else that I might want to associate with the job. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are other kinds of customizations that you might want to make to this report that would not be supported with Office Connector Starter. For example, if I wanted to see the job status column coming from the database, or the job to date cost figure, things like that that the report does not already show, but where those values would be in your Timberline database, those things are definitely possible, but not with the starter version. Attempting to modify the query to include those would simply invalidate the report design, and then you would not be able to run it. Using the licensed version with the JC job list with maps and weather, definitely that is possible, and the report would function just fine, adding those additional pieces of information. Once again, this Excel-based report is brought to you by Sage and is powered by Event 1 Office Connector. A full license of Office Connector can be purchased, enabling you to use a variety of other pre-built Excel reports, have your consultant create reports for you, design your own reports, or even send data from Excel back into Sage Timberline Office. Be sure to visit the Event 1 software website to sign up for a free live webinar about Office Connector, or contact us if you have any questions about upgrade options, pricing, or licensing.